Hello, everyone. Welcome. I see people are still joining us, so I'm going to give us just a second to get started here. All right. I'm Craig Harwood. I'm the director of the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowships for New Americans. I'm super glad that you are able to join us today. We have a special webinar planned where we are going to be learning a little bit about what it means to be a re-applicant. And what I mean by that specifically is you are able to apply for the fellowship more than once, and we often have applicants who don't win the fellowship on the first round, and then they apply another time, and they do win the fellowship. So we thought we would try to provide just a little bit of context for what that means. And most importantly, we're going to be talking to a couple of our fellows who are themselves re-applicants, and they can share some thoughts on, how they approached an application the first time versus the second time. First, I'd like to introduce you to some of my colleagues. We're on the call with Nika Landau, our communications director, who actually I don't think is going to be here for very long. She has another appointment. And we've got Yamilith Lopez, our administrative assistant, who's going to be on the call with us to help run this thing and also to be typing answers to some of your questions. So what is that means that you're allowed to ask questions. And we have there's a chat box that you can use to ask questions. Is that the best place to ask your questions, Yami? Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, either in the Q&A or in the chat box, whichever works.
Okay, so this Q&A and chat box, and what will happen is we'll try to move through this in the kind of timing that will allow you to allow us to answer some of your questions live. We may not get to all of them, and again, Yami will type in some answers to some of the questions that she gets asked along the way. So let's get started, and I'd like to introduce you to two of our newest fellows. I'm going to have them introduce themselves and just say just a brief bit about your what you're studying and your heritage, and I don't know if there's anything else quickly you think, where you're studying, anything else quickly you think we should know. And let's start with Patryk. Can you say hi to everybody?
Yes, hello, I'm Patryk Kozlowski. I'm a first-year graduate student in chemistry at Harvard right now. I did my undergraduate at Caltech, and I'm of Polish descent.
Excellent. Thank you, Patryk. Glad you're here with us. All right, Tahmid, do you want to say hi?
Hey everyone, I'm Tahmid. I'm a second year PhD student just wrapping up in electrical engineering and computer science at Berkeley. I did my undergrad at Cornell, and I was born and grew up most of my childhood in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
All right, wonderful. Thanks for being here. Okay, let's see if we can get to this webinar. Today we've already met the fellows. We'll talk about the selection process for re-applicants. We'll give you some thoughts on your approach to creating an application. We'll talk about optional exhibits, recommendations, and then, as I mentioned, we'll leave some time for Q&A. You should note that the selection process is merit-based. And so we're looking for 30 remarkable individuals who are going to go on to make contributions to society and culture in their field. I will also just make sure to contrast this with financial need-based. While our fellows, many of them need the money, many of them perhaps don't need the money. Perhaps they're on a university fellowship or have some other funding source for their education. And that's fine with us because we are need blind. Some of the fellows need it, some of them don't. But what we focus on is merit. We're looking for, again, 30 remarkable individuals. We don't have any quotas in our program. We don't have a certain number of students in a particular field or from a particular heritage. There's no, we don't have any specific numbers we're looking for. And we do our best to holistically review every application. What that means for us is that we're really digging deep, we're reading the entire application, and we're getting a sense for where your strengths are. We're not just going to focus on like another couple bullet points down. It says we don't have GPA or test scores. Well, that's important for us because that may be where some of your strengths are demonstrated through your GPA and your test scores, but there may be other aspects of your application that you really want us to focus on. And you'll tell us about those, and we will do our best to focus on the areas where your strengths really stand out. We value a concept called, we like to call the distance traveled. How far have you come from where you started? This is important to us because we feel that people who've traveled a great distance by the time they've applied often have a great distance more to travel, and so their trajectory is quite far. And we're not talking physical distance, but perhaps you were the first person, the first generation of your family to move to the United States. You grew, you came here not speaking any English, helped raise your family, first person in your family to go to college. Well, that by the time you're in graduate school and doing amazing work, that's quite a distance you've traveled. And we know that you're going to go on in even an equal or greater distance. So it's something that we value. I wouldn't say that every single applicant has traveled a great distance. Other people are doing really remarkable work, but perhaps didn't travel that great distance. Well, we value anybody who's doing, incredible work and seems like they're placed to make those contributions to society in the future. We are a nonpartisan organization. We're a nonprofit 501c3. All of our applications are reviewed after the deadline, and what that means is we don't do rolling admissions. We take our applications and wait till the entire group is in after the application deadline, and that's in late October of this year. And then we review them all at once. And notably, you can apply more than once to the fellowship. We'll get into that now. So let's turn to our fellows and ask a few relevant questions to what it means to have applied more than once. And I'll just start out by saying, in terms of eligibility, if you're eligible based on our eligibility criteria, which you can find online, which means it's about where you are in your academic standing, your age, and do you fit the New American criteria. If you're eligible, you can apply, even if you've applied before, okay? Or even if you've applied before you've applied twice. You're as long as you remain eligible, you are permitted to apply to the fellowship. So first question, did applying the first time help you with eventually winning the application or winning the fellowship? And I ask this specifically because we often have people say like, oh, should I apply this year or should I wait for like a more ideal time? I would say that, you shouldn't bother waiting for the most ideal time, or at least, that would be my logic, because, you could always apply another time. But let's hear from our fellows. Do you feel that first application somehow set you up for your ability to win the fellowship when you did reapply? Let me start with Patryk.
Yeah, so I think applying for the first time actually really helped me. Like, for some context, I'm a science student, So, as probably is the case for most science students, you go through your undergraduate years just focused on the science, not really thinking about the bigger picture and where you fit into it. So, by applying for the first time, I started to think about my new American story, and starting to think about my new American story earlier helped me put together a successful application when I reapplied.
Great. Yeah, I love hearing that. And I think this concept of, like first time was focused on science, but then you really thought more about the big picture. And I think that's something that, first of all, it's something I think a second time applicant has more perspective on that. But just in general, I think that, we're looking for people who aren't just mired in the details, but understand the implications of their work, and who understand, what their potential to make a contribution through their work really is. And that's the kind of big picture thinking. And I'm glad that you gained that kind of insight through the first application, and because that helps you, of course, then apply a second time. Tahmid, how about you?
Definitely, I echo what Patryk mentioned. I think for myself, it was very helpful to use the first application window to really think about this new American story, how to frame it, really dig deep. A lot of people, myself included, have probably written the other essay when applying to grad school, etc., but I had not written about the new American experience or thought about it to the point where I felt it was necessary for this fellowship. Additionally, none of my recommenders had previously written a recommendation letter for this fellowship. And I think it was useful for them as well to become familiar with the fellowship and the criteria, understanding what it is that the fellowship is trying to do, which I believe was very useful the second time around when I applied, and all my recommenders were already familiar with what it is that I was trying to do.
Great. I think that's such helpful advice. And let me take a step back now to describe these two essays. So the first essay is what we in-house call the New American essay, and it asks you about how being a new American has shaped your perspective, shaped your worldview, shaped your experiences as a new American, and shaped, just who you are and what you want to do in the world. The second essay is focused more on grad school and sort of your career goals. How does this grad program fit into your goals? How it will help you achieve them? And what are some of your goals for the work you're going to be doing? Now, I'll tell you, the essays often blend together, and there's often some elements of the New American story in the second essay, or somehow some of the ideas you had for graduate school started earlier and appear in essay number one. So we're not super rigid about that, but that's the general themes. And, when Tahmid says this is the first time you probably have written that essay, I hear that a lot. People haven't been asked what it means to be a new American. So you write that essay, and it is, if it's the first time, it could be it's the kind of thing that coming back to it several months later, if you didn't win the fellowship in particular, gives you that perspective and that ability to really say, is this the new American story that I really want to present? So I do think having that essay under your belt, you've written it, and then you're going to come back to it and refine it, can be very helpful. Let me stick with you, Tahmid. So where were you in your studies when you applied the first time versus this round?
Yep. The first time I applied was a couple months right after I'd started grad school. So I was a first year student, having just started grad school, still trying to dig into what research I will be thinking about. So
Okay.
the second time I applied was the year after. So I had a year of grad school classes, more exposure with my advisor and professors, and more familiarity with the fellowship.
Okay, got it. And Patryk, how about you?
Yeah, the first time I applied was as a senior in my undergraduate, and then the second time I applied successfully was in my first year of graduate school.
Great. Okay. And so obviously no surprise. Both of you were further along in your graduate programs. One of you was in the graduate program where you hadn't even been in a program before, and the other of you was simply at the very beginning of the graduate program the first time, and then you were a little bit later. So yeah, I'm guessing that helps you kind of refine some of your ideas in your work, and we'll get into that in a couple of minutes. Let me talk you through the application process here. You'll go on to our website, pdsoros.org, to start an application. The application starts with some sort of background demographic questions about, when you were born and where you're from, where you went to school, things like that. It includes a question for re-applicants that we're going to dig into a little bit in a moment. We ask you to upload a resume or a CV. We ask you for all college and graduate school transcripts from schools that you were matriculated at. Any graduate school entrance test scores. These are scores that your graduate program requires. So if your graduate program requires them, like GREs or GREs in a particular field, maybe, then we require them. But if they don't require them, we don't require them. The two essays that we just talked about, optional exhibits and recommendations. And we'll get into these, but I'll just say for the optional exhibits, these are up to 5 additional documents that you would like to include with your application. And for the recommendations, we require at least 3 recommendations, but we will accept up to 5. So if you feel that an extra recommendation or 2 is going to benefit your application, you are welcome to include it. Okay, so let's turn to this question about being a re-applicant. So we have a question on the application that says, have you applied before? And if so, it asks you like, what has changed since last time? What's different about who you are or what you're doing, or what are some of the changes since last year? Just so it's all kind of in one place, so we have a sense of what the difference. And I don't mean what's changed about the application itself. We mean what's happened, what's changed about you and your goals and the work you're focused on, things like that. Patryk, do you remember this question, and do you have any sense of how you used this slot?
Yes, I do. I do remember that I didn't think too deeply about it. I just gave like a 1 or 2 sentence response, and my hope was that I put a lot of work into my main essays, and then also the recommendations would help. So I didn't do too much work for this.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Okay, that sounds good. And Tahmid, how about you?
Same thing. I had 2 sentences to highlight what the differences were, and then I just mentioned my CV and the essays reflect these changes. And hopefully that was enough for the reviewers to catch on.
Okay, so what you're hearing here is don't overthink this section, but it is helpful to know what changes are. And I do think they're very specific to each individual. Like the difference in being in graduate school versus not being in graduate school. There's a big difference that you would maybe want to state, or maybe you had a publication since the last time you applied and you would want to underscore, you'd like to let us know about that publication. But you don't have to write us an essay in this section. I don't think we allow you to, just because the slot is there. The slot is there for you to highlight any specific changes, but you don't have to overdo it. So Tahmid, what do you think you did differently in your successful application versus the first application? And let's be honest, maybe it had nothing to do with your application. Somebody could conceivably submit the exact same application, and maybe it's a different group of people screening it, or maybe it's that you're just in a different place in grad school. But it's also possible that your changes made a difference. So why don't you tell us about what you changed, and if so, what you think maybe was the most successful change?
Sure, of course. I think there were 2 main parts. One was I just went back through my essays and tried to take a step back and see if when I read it, it makes perfect sense in my head. It says the exact story I want, but coming back to it, does it convey the same story that I'm actually trying to someone who doesn't know me at all and has no idea who I am? So I think I did just reword a lot of my essays, not the content necessarily, just the way I express my story and my professional experience in trying to convey the importance of or the perceived importance of my research. And secondly, when I applied for the first time, I had just started grad school. I did not have any publications in undergrad or in my industry experience. But by the time I applied the second time, I had a couple published works and some that I were working on, and I was sure to highlight those in my CV. I have no idea which of those mattered, if at all, but I suspected that perhaps highlighting my research efforts, which is a key part of grad school, was perhaps pretty crucial in that second application.
Great. And Patryk, how about you? Do you have a sense of like, what you did differently in version number 2 versus version number 1?
Yeah, so the case for me, like, even after I got rejected after the first application, I knew I had a pretty interesting story. So right away, I knew that I would apply for the second time. So the way that this went is the application opens in like early May. And so I started writing my essays in early May, and I think, I mean, I had the fellowship advisor help me with editing the essays, but you don't really need one. It's enough if you can just have a friend or someone who's good at writing to look over your essays. But I believe I went back and forth with that fellowship advisor a total of 7 times about my 2 essays. So yeah, I put some more work for the second one.
All right, very helpful. Thank you. Let's dig in specifically to the essays because Tahmid, you said you went and you read through just to say, like, does my story make sense? And does it make sense not just to me, but now I'm going to read it through the eyes of someone who doesn't know me at all. So what did you think? Did you say, like, after reading the first version, you know what? Yeah, this is good. I think somebody knows me. Or did you say, yeah, I better I should change this?
My immediate thought was, I think the message is there, but perhaps it's not written in the best way. So it was a lot of just rephrasing and just restructuring. I thought the New Americans essay was quite strong to begin with. The second one was the one I changed more, and that's the one about grad school aspirations. It was heavily inspired by my statement of purpose in grad school applications the first time around. And the second time around, I thought, yeah, it says all the right things, but it sounds too much like an SOP for grad school and not an essay that I'm trying to convey to non-technical experts about why I'm trying to do this research. Again, it was, I think, a lot of framing, but trying to take a step back from the technical details and more in the motivations and why I'm interested and what is the actual benefit in the real world that perhaps is more palatable for someone who's not an EE professor reviewing your application.
Great. So, okay, you just got some really great feedback here or some information on how to approach this because I do think this is a challenge. You often you feel like, okay, this is my grad school essay. I wrote a grad school essay, and often they seem very similar to me. At the same rate, you don't know that. In fact, you kind of are sure that the people reading the applications, especially in the first rounds, are going to be generalists, and they're not going to be electrical engineering, quantum chemistry experts. So you're going to want to think through how can I make sure that I'm speaking to an audience that isn't an expert in my field. But at the same rate, you do need to go deep enough that people understand you are at the very top of your field, because we do get uh, sometimes your application is read by an expert in the field. And if that's the case, you really have to be prepared so you can speak to the experts as well as the sort of the generalists. And so it sounds like you did a good job at that time because you won the fellowship the second time around. Patryk, how about you? Do you feel that you changed your essays much?
Yeah, as for me, I don't think I changed my essays that much. Probably similar to what Tahmid says. I think I just thought a lot about the message I wanted to present, and then that just ended up with me having to do some restructuring and honing of my essays, but there wasn't so much divergence from the first iteration.
Right. So it's good to hear that. And I hear both of you saying, like you had good new American stories. You felt like they were, you felt like they were compelling and strong and interesting. So, all of you out there, don't second guess yourself. If you feel like you have a strong narrative and you feel like you did a good job at it, you don't necessarily have to go and start out with a whole new essay. Like you may have some good material there, and your life is clearly interesting and compelling, and so maybe you're going to keep some or all of either that one or your other essay. But I do think the grad school essay is more likely to change because you're either entering or in grad school, so you're growing as as an academic or as a person who's getting more involved in your field. Now, for the recommendations, you both are at interesting inflection points in your grad school careers, because Patryk, you weren't in grad school for the first application, and then you were in grad school for the second time. So Patryk, did you change your recommenders? And I guess the big question is, did you include somebody from grad school the second time around? You'd only just met them though, so maybe that you hadn't built up a relationship.
Yes, I did include one recommender out of my total of four from graduate school, but I don't know if that mattered that much. I think just like the first time around, I treated this P.D. Soros Fellowship application like most other science fellowship applications. So like I just asked the same people who wrote recommendations for the other fellowships if they could submit something for this fellowship, but the second time around, I really put a lot more thought into who to ask specifically and how to ask them so that they wouldn't just change a little bit of wording and submit their recommendation, because I don't think that makes for a very effective recommendation letter if it's not tailored to the specific fellowship.
Great. Okay, so you answered a question that I didn't ask, but that is so helpful. And that is, how do you get a strong letter of recommendation? And that's to really help your recommenders understand what it is you're looking for. And in this case, in our case, it's letting them know what this fellowship is about and what we're looking for. And we give advice on the website about this for recommenders. But I think that you going to your recommenders and letting them know what you think would be strong in terms of writing about you as a person, and also letting them know about what the specific kind of goals and details of the fellowship are going to get you a much stronger letter of recommendation rather than just kind of a generic letter. Tahmid, how about you? So you had just gotten in grad school. That means you had just met your professors sort of the first year applying. Did you use any that first year from grad school? Or did you rely on other, you had already worked in business and, you had undergrad professors. Or did you just rely on those? And then by the second application, did you pivot and use some grad school grad school recommendations?
Yeah. The first year I used two undergrad professors who I was very close with, so I knew they would still remember me and be able to write some strong letters. One industry recommender who was my manager at work, and my advisor in grad school who had only really just known me through my application and perhaps a month or two of interactions. I felt good about the non-grad school recommenders, but not so much about grad school recommendation just because of lack of exposure. My second year, I included a second professor who I had interacted with at grad school. And for all of my recommenders, I shared I think there's a website on the PD Soros Fellowship website about what to consider in a recommendation letter. I shared all of those points and also highlighted my interactions with my grad school professors to make sure they had specific interactions or projects in mind while writing the letters. Um, I think that worked well for me because my first year in grad school was quite eventful, and none of that made its way to the first application, but definitely, I'm sure, made its way into the second round of application recommendations.
Right, great. Okay, so fantastic information for all of you. But the carry through on both is that both Patryk and Tahmid worked with the recommenders to give them a sense of what would be helpful, and I think that's something that you should take away. Okay, I'll stick with you. Resume and optional exhibits. Did anything change for you? And I'm sure it did because you talked about a couple publications that happened. So I'm guessing those got included. But why don't you just let us know what the changes in your optional exhibits were, and then also again probably that was reflected in your resume.
I don't think I added anything in my optional exhibit. It was optional, and I didn't think anything I had was particularly suitable for that. Given that I included all of the publications and extracurricular activities in my resume, those are the same things that in the reapplication question I highlighted that I do have new publication experiences and that they are in the resume, and I made sure that they were highlighted in the resume.
Great. And I will say that some people include abstracts to papers they've published or co-published. They could include, sometimes they upload a whole paper. So you can do that. But you, Tahmid, chose to highlight it in other places, including on your resume. So it was certainly still clear to everybody. Patryk, how about you? Any changes in your resume or optional exhibits?
Yeah, for me, the resume and the optional exhibits really didn't change all that much. I mean, I guess the one advice I'll give, this may be kind of obvious to some, but for the optional exhibits, if you're in a science applicant, I think the best thing you've done a lot of like science writing for your different summer internships that you've done in the past. So it's very simple to just add them add those pieces as optional exhibits, and that's largely what I did.
Excellent. All right. Okay, let's take a step back now. And, we're talking about the details of the application, which I think is very helpful. But, at the same rate, I think what would be the overall goal of a second application compared to a first application? And that would probably be to show growth, to show that, you've grown in some way since your first application. So do you have any thoughts on what's the best way to show growth? Patryk, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, so as we touched on a bit earlier, I think probably the best way to show growth is by having strong recommendations. and through those recommendations, when you apply the first time, if you have a given recommendation and then the second time around you have a much more tailored and stronger recommendation, I think that's a good way to show growth. Yeah, I would definitely think the recommendations are a good way to show growth.
Great, fantastic answer. Tahmid, how about you? Any thoughts on the best way to show growth?
I think every point you mentioned here provides ample opportunity to do so through resumes, even the re-applicant question, recommendation letters like Patryk mentioned. I think as long as you are able to just talk about them, hopefully it should be there should be ample opportunity to showcase the ways you've grown. I do know for specifically one of my interviewers had asked me, had listed what I mentioned were the deltas between my first and second year applications, and had asked me specifics about some of that. So I think just between all of these things, it should be pretty clear that there's a lot of place for you to talk about them.
All right, that was great. Okay, I'm going to move us on, and we'll get to some questions in just a minute. I see we have a few. We have some resources for you to help with your applications. One is we have put together some guides to different aspects of the application, and there's some of the aspects we're talking about here, like how do you go about selecting your recommenders and asking them to write letters for you? How do you get started on your essays? What are some ways to think about optional exhibits? So you can find those all on our website, pdsoros.org, and hopefully they're helpful. We have some mailing lists. You can sign up for any one or all of them. The Distance Traveled is a monthly newsletter that has fellows share some things that they're thinking about and working on. Fellows in the News is a weekly email, and it's a news digest of fellows who have been in the news. Either they were quoted, or they wrote an article, or somehow their work is being highlighted. And then occasionally the fellowship news goes out, and that's just stuff that's happening with the fellowship that you might want to know about, but we don't send that out very often. So again, you can sign up for any one or two or three of those. You can follow us on social media. I would encourage you to take a look at our Instagram in particular. We hand off Instagram to a different fellow every week, and they tell their own stories through pictures and stories. So I'd encourage you to check out Instagram. And we have a website directory. It's like a database of all of our fellows, and you can search them through a whole bunch of different methods. Like you could search by what grad school people went to, or you could search by the field of interest or study or the degree. And there's a keyword search that you can look into, but those would be ways that you can find fellows and read a little bit about them, who maybe have similar interests or things that going on that you think would be good for you to know about. And that's a way you can learn about the different fellows in the program. Okay, so we have reached the end. I believe we've reached the end. Yep. Oops, let me go back one. Okay, we have reached the end, and that means that we have some time for questions. So Yami, can you open us up to questions?
Yes. So first and foremost, our first question is it necessary for an applicant to be already enrolled in a graduate program when they apply to a fellowship? So I think I can answer that very quickly. So we have a lot of applicants who actually apply for the fellowship as they're also applying for their graduate program. So it's not necessary to already be in your graduate program. But now the question is, do the fellows believe that if they were not in the program, that would have been harder to write their application materials?
Tommy, do you want to try that one?
Yeah. I think yes, in that it's always helpful to have materials to start from. But like we were just talking a little while ago, it's just a launch pad because you can't really reuse it because the audience is different. You can't, when writing a grad school application, you know very much that typically the people reading your application will be people in your field, which is not the right assumption you should be making when writing the PD Soros essay.
Great. Next question is, did you reread your prior application before beginning your new application? And did you write something, then reflect upon your previous application?
Patryk, how about you? Did you reread your application before getting ready for the second round?
Yes, I did reread the first application that I made, and then I guess in general, I don't think I was fully prepared to present my new American story the first time around. So I think the second time around, I made some dedicated times to sit down with my parents and really kind of grill them about my family heritage I knew so I could have a better idea of the story I wanted to present.
Great, thank you.
Great. The next question is for you, Craig. How does the committee view applicants that have pivoted interests between applications?
You know, so many people have pivots, and I'll just start out by saying you're not alone. This is the world is understanding when you see opportunities to change course. In general, I think pivots are most convincing when they make sense. It's understand why you changed course and how the work you had done up until that time has led up till this change, as opposed to it's like, I don't know why I changed. It didn't make any, I just decided what I was doing didn't work. So I think pivots that seem to make sense and seem to be a continuation in some way, pivoting on something. I mean, that's the whole idea of the pivot, is that you're pivoting on something. There's something that you're maintaining at the same time that you're moving in a new direction. So I think those people who have gained new insight and have understand where they were and where they're going are looked upon quite favorably.
Great. And another question for you, Craig. How do you advise applicants who were a finalist the first time they applied and then also became a finalist the second time around? How do you advise them to approach the interview process differently?
How do I advise applicants who didn't win the first?
No, like that they were a finalist in the first round and then they become a finalist again. Like, how do you advise them to approach the interview process again?
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I think this whole hour is sort of spent on how to approach the application itself differently. Well, I think that talking to fellowship advisors and talking to mentors and simply going through some of your answers, thinking them through, having them ask you questions, as if you were in an interview setting. But I think the other thing is, you have more knowledge than most people do now, right? I mean, you know what the interviews are like, and our interviews are quite special. We talk about your work, but we talk about who you are as a person. We talk about your goals and dreaming big. And so, I think you are simply in a better place to think through some of the interview questions from a different perspective because you've been there. So you're probably the most prepared person in the whole room for interviewing.
And that's all the questions we have.
Okay, I'm going to give it 1 second to see if anybody else wants to jump into the Q&A. But in the meantime, I will thank our fellows who were so thoughtful. I mean, I think you got incredible advice today from both Patryk and Tahmid about what it means to be a re-applicant. Both some great thoughts on what to change and what to do differently. But I also thought there was some good conversation about don't overthink everything, like, yeah, you're an interesting person, you're doing important work. Have a little bit of confidence that some of what you did should be maintained, and that if you had an interesting New American story the first time, you still will have an interesting New American story this time, for instance. All right, anybody else pop into the Q&A box?
Yes. One question was, what sort of questions did you ask your parents when writing the New American essay?
Oh, great one. Tahmid, did you talk to your family or not?
No, I've heard a lot of the stories growing up, so I didn't talk to them. I just had them in my head.
Okay, great. I think it's a great idea if you don't have that kind of experience to talk to your family, and hear some of those stories, because maybe you never asked them before and they're eager to tell you. Patryk, what kind of questions did you ask your family?
Yeah, so for me, it was a little bit more pertinent. So a major part of my New American story, I figured, would revolve around the fact that my grandfather on my dad's side was a coal mining engineer, so I knew that was that fact, but I didn't know that much about the backstory. So it was very helpful to sit down with my dad, both my parents actually, and learn a bit more about my dad's upbringing, with his father being a coal mining engineer, and how that played out.
Excellent. All right. That was great. Very, very specific. But I think in general, thinking about your family history, asking questions, asking about different family members, asking about motivations, asking about what was challenging for you, what were you excited about? And what did you look forward to? What was scary and unknown to you? What was different what turned out differently than you expected? But there's a lot of questions that can get you going. And I have heard from so many fellows that this conversation was incredibly powerful for them, well beyond an essay, just because it really enabled them to have some great conversations that they never would have had, and, bond as a family. Okay. I'm guessing that's it, right, Yami? All right. So thank you very much to everybody who was on the call today. We appreciate you taking the time to learn a little bit more about the fellowships. And thank you so much to Tahmid and to Patryk. It's really generous of you to spend, close to an hour here talking with potential applicants about how they can create really strong applications. So really appreciate it. Thank you, Yamilet, for joining us here and helping run this session. And Nika, if you're out there somewhere, thank you for your help as well. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.